Okay, we should have sound now. Got that fixed. I'm just messing around with cameras and I'm not having good success. So I'm just going to change my computer and we're going to go on that one. Okay, I'll get in the middle and let me get our Instagram people on and we'll just see what's what. Okay, bear with me a second more if you would. Got another cable here I'm going to give a try too. I'm learning so much doing these lives every day about cables and things. Oh my goodness sakes. So bear with me because we might be better for camera now. Let's see. Ha! There we go. Okay, let me just zoom it in a little bit. Hang on. Bear with me. You guys are getting to get dizzy today. Holy cow, it's been a process. I'm trying to get it to focus on my face. Face track enabled. Okay, well, the zoom's not happening. All right, we're just gonna get started. Sorry about all the hiccups. I'm Susan Smith. You're in my studio, Stitched by Susan. I'm coming to you live each day during the month of April, talking about all sorts of topics that relate to machine quilting. And today is extra special because I'm zoomed way out and you get to see some of my fun lights and things that surround me. But the topic for today is thread choices. So yesterday we talked a little about my favorite type of thread, which happens to be 100% polyester, strong, low lint, really good for machine quilting, high-speed quilting. But today I want to talk a little more about thread color choices. Now, my favorite style of quilting, as you may know, is doing edge-to-edge work on useful family quilts, couch quilts I usually call them. So the same quilting design and therefore the same thread are across the entire quilt. All the fabrics are being quilted with the exact same thread. So how does one choose thread if you've got a quilt that has multiple colors or that has even maybe highly contrasting colors? Bear with me yet another second because I'm not seeing the comments and I need to have those up. There we go. Now I'm seeing them. So let's see who all's tuning in, and we'll give a few more people a chance to get on before we dive right into this. Lynn, Barbara, the Quilting She Shed, you're doing just fine. Thanks for the vote of confidence. Donna, Angie, good, good, good. Celia, Melanie. Denise, I discovered the fix for no notifications yesterday. You might want to type that into the chat window for any others that are wondering the same thing. Edna, Stitchscape, Felicia, awesome. So nice to see you all here. Okay, back to today's topic. Thread choices, especially on a quilt that has multiple colors, wide range of colors, perhaps high contrasting colors. And I happen to have finished a quilt yesterday that's a pretty good example of this. So let's just go over this. This is really practical, right? To see what the quilt actually looks like and what the choices are. Check out this quilt. Maybe it's good I have a zoomed out camera. You get to see lots of the quilt. And I brought a whole bunch of the colors that are represented in the quilt. Can you see this coral? It's way down here that matches the bright blue that's up by my face. Here's that blue. There's a golden one. Here's the gold. There's some deep red in a couple of places. Here's the deep red. And then, of course, the background of this quilt is kind of a white on white fabric. So there's always the ubiquitous eggshell. Am I right? So I'm going to keep holding this up for a jiffy so that you can catch what I'm referring to as I talk about this. So often the advice that I see given to machine quilters is choose the lightest fabric in the quilt and quilt it with that, which would be this eggshell, the color of the background. Now, I'm not going to say that's wrong. I'm just going to tell you why I don't choose to do it that way, and then you can make your own decision, of course, based on what you like. My thinking goes this way. If I'm quilting my design across the entire quilt top, my thread is going to be seen on all of the fabrics. So what I want, what I think is ideal then, is a thread that shows up somewhat on all of the fabrics. So it doesn't necessarily perfectly match any one. So for example, if I chose the gold thread that's in this block, it would almost disappear on those gold squares, right? But would show up very much on the white. For sure that's true if I chose one of the dark threads, like this red. There's some teal in here too and a dark purple, which I didn't bring. But if I chose one of these really dark threads, they would disappear on the block that is their color, their match, and it would show up so sharply on the white for sure, but even on the coral and the gold and the paler pink. Similarly, if I choose the eggshell, I think it's kind of true also. There's much more background, and so it's going to kind of disappear in all those background places, but on some of these dark blocks, it's going to look so stark. And to my eye, that looks like it's kind of stopping and starting, right? Disappears in the white, shows up brightly in the purple. So I don't love that look. Are you wondering what I chose? I actually went for a paler shade of the blue. And I could have done this honestly with any of the colors represented, but my thinking behind choosing a paler one is this still shows up on the blue blocks to a certain degree, and it also shows up on the eggshell and on the red and on the gold, etc., etc. So I liked that mix. And the lady who this quilt is for also liked the blue, so that's what we chose. We could have also chosen a much paler gold. We probably could have gone with a lighter pink. That would have been fine too. And the truth is, the eggshell would be all right too. It totally would be. But I've just kind of given you my reasoning process for why I tend to pick a middle of the road. I see quite a few quilts, and I don't have an example here to show you today. But I'm going to move all the threads so I can lean in a little bit and get a bit closer to you. I see quite a few quilts that are, for example, in autumnal colors. So you'll see the purple and the gold and the deep red, and often the background will be something that's tan or a little bit khaki or cream, somewhere in there. So with the thinking, choose the lightest color for the thread, you'd end up with something cream. Or you can take my philosophy, which is let's pick something that's visible on all the fabrics. So if I love the cream, then I might just go 3 or 4 shades deeper and get a deep tan. And that then, I feel like, blends, unifies all the colors a little better. Darker than the background, lighter than some of the fabrics in it. Is that all making sense? So I'm going to see what your comments are. Let's scroll back. I try to take them in chronological order because it's just easier for me to find. Okay, there's some that I saw. Gaynor in Johannesburg. I got your email yesterday, Gaynor. Thank you. Gretchen in Toledo. Doreen. Samantha. Sue Rickman in Ontario. Laura Lee. Cindy Lou. Melody. So good to see you all. Debbie, I'm piecing a 2-color quilt, plum and cream. Not sure what color to use for quilting it. I'll come back to that in just a second, Debbie. David McLaughlin, howdy from Spokane, which is my city. Awesome. Beautiful quilts. Good morning, good morning. Thanks everyone for saying good morning. I love it. CM, I tend to quilt with light colors. Diane, I find coral to be weirdly perfect on a lot of quilts, especially scrappy ones. I love your viewpoints. Really, the truth is, this is subject to your taste and the look that you like. Absolutely it is. And this is why I think probably so many quilters gravitate toward that eggshell. Maybe they prefer the look of sort of lightening the whole quilt. Absolutely, subject to your taste. So the one of you that mentioned you find coral works well on a lot of quilts, great. A lot of us find that grays, various shades of gray, are an awesome blender thread, sometimes when there's no gray in the quilt at all. Actually, it would have worked fine on this example that I was showing you. A fairly light gray would have been a fine choice. Just so happened, of the choices that I brought out, my client liked the blue, so that's what we went with. One other thing I wanted to mention, and I see that someone commented here, I like the variegated white cream thread for quilting. Actually, that's a good idea because it has that little bit of differentiation which almost brings a sparkle. But variegated thread gets tossed out to me often. How come you don't use more variegated thread? Or, I love variegated thread. Some people will say that's my go-to choice when I have a quilt that's got multiple things going on. Again, this is my thinking, right? You go with your taste. My thinking with the variegated is similar in, got to get my thoughts in order here. Because it matches perfectly on some of the fabrics and not on some of the others, depending on where in that variegation you are, I find it gives the same effect as a thread that perfectly matches one of the fabrics, but not all the rest. In other words, where it blends, where it matches, it almost disappears. It blends right in and you don't see it. Where it's highly contrasted, it shows up like a beacon. So to my eye, it looks stoppy-starty, and I don't love that look either. So I seldom choose variegated in terms of variegated colors, like different colors in a thread. But the lady CM who mentioned variegated white and cream, I've certainly used, for example, a variegated gold, so paler shades of yellow, deeper, richer ochres, and that type of variegation brings some color and depth and life. So it's a fun choice, but I personally don't love the variegated that have different colors. You know, you'll get a blue and a yellow, shades of blue and shades of yellow on a blue and yellow and white quilt. To me, that just starts to look like a jumble. But this is my taste, right? We're talking my taste here. So, a few more comments. What color would you use on a black and white quilt? And Debbie was asking about a plum and cream as well. Super good questions, and they're tricky, and you kind of have to use your judgment on the specific quilt you're at, because size of piecing makes a difference, you know, if it's predominantly black or predominantly white or plum or cream, etc. But my thinking kind of goes this way again. I will use something that's between. So on the plum and cream, for example, I don't know that I would use any kind of purpley plum, because that's still going to highly contrast with the cream, but maybe in your cream go far, far, far deeper, like way into a rich, rich tan, and see how that looks. The way that I kind of judge how it's going to look is I will pool out, and I'll show you because I do quite a bit. I'm not shy about it. I'll pool out a couple of, well, a yard or two of thread. You probably can't even see the thread. But I pool that on my quilt, and I'll even move it around over the different fabrics and where seam lines cross, just to get a good sense of what it will look like. The spool is so solid, that's not a very good gauge of what it looks like. This little pool of single threads is a much better judge of what it's going to look like stitched. Another tip when you have super high contrast is to consider using a lighter weight thread, because it's just going to be less bold. So these spools, this 100% poly that I typically use is a 40 weight. If you were on yesterday, I misspoke at one point and I called it 50 weight, but it is in fact 40. But you could quilt with a 60 weight. Glide produces a lot of 60 weight threads, and then some companies, I'm trying to think of one, Wonderfill for sure, has 80 weight threads, which also work pretty good as a needle thread and are just that much finer and that much less visible when you've got two highly contrasting things like black and white, for example. So that's my thought there. Karen, Keto Quilts, does the backing ever affect the decision? Do you know it does, Amy? It factors in sometimes in different ways. On this particular quilt that I was showing you guys this morning, it's got a quite dark blue on the back. And so I opted to use that same blue that I used on the front. It's a pretty design. It actually was a computerized design, which I don't do very often, a digital design. So it's a pretty one, and so it shows up nicely on the back. But sometimes what I will do is adjust the shades of the backing thread so it's not so high contrast on the back. Again, it's a matter of personal preference, but if you've got like any imperfect stitches and you've got a super high contrast on the back, you might be sorry about that. So in this example, I could have done my pale blue on the front, and this was the pale blue I used, quite pale. And I could have done a couple shades darker of blue, like maybe this one on the back. So they're similar. I don't get something vastly different showing through the needle holes, but it does darken up the back a bit. So that's an option. I personally do not tend to use strongly differing threads, top and bottom, for that reason. It's really hard to not have the bottom showing through on the top or the top showing through on the bottom, even if it's just through the needle holes, even if you have perfect tension. So I would not be inclined to use two different threads like this, but I might do something that's similar in tone or shade, if that makes sense, on the backing. Okay, the Quilting She Shed, thanks for doing these. We appreciate your time and sharing. Thank you for those kind words, because it is a bit of an effort. There's no doubt about it. CM is asking someone else in the feed, but I'm going to answer too, about invisible thread or maybe monofilament thread. My personal preference is I've not found one that I like the feel of so far. Now, thread manufacturers do keep improving them. And even 10 years ago, they still felt so much like plastic. They're better now, but I still don't love the feel. To me, they still feel a bit like fishing line, at least the brands that I've tried. However, it is absolutely worth experimenting, buying a small spool and trying it out on a small project or a table runner or something little. It's not a high commitment level. Carly Porter is a quilter that I think of that loves, oh, hang on, we lost the main camera again. It just flickered. I'm back. Huh. Carly Porter is a quilter I know of that does really enjoy monofilament thread, and she does often highly colored work, and so for her that works as a blender, as a kind of invisible thread. So experiment with it. It's not my first love, but you may find that it suits you for your type of quilts just right, in which case go for it. Teresa, Lisa, Barbara, I find that a lime green really makes colors pop. It sounds weird, but trust me, it works. I believe you, Barbara. I have a green that I call celery green. It's got a bit of yellow tone to it, and I find that it works across a surprising amount of colors too. I agree with you there. And even the lady earlier who said coral. There are just certain shades that work super well as blenders, and seriously, try pooling thread. That's your way to know, because when you hold up that spool, it's too solid. It's not going to look like a blender. But when you look at a few strands of thread, it's apt to look much more like a blender. Aren't you guys loving the view of my little table at my long arm here today? You're seeing the back of it. Sandy, 2 days in a row. Thanks and good morning. Cesro Paint is saying, and green shades. Yep, we're all in agreement on that. CM, some quilts may be perfect with black thread. It just depends. It so does. There are so many factors, certainly not the least of which is just your taste to begin with. But yeah, how much there is of each color, what size the pieces are, you just have to spool it out and try it. Beverly, I find certain shades pick up colors from the blocks. Sue, I often use a light dove gray, seems to go with most. I agree with you there. Gray is a foolproof choice, but even then, mess with the shades because there's taupey, brownish sort of grays, and there's bluish sort of grays, lavendery almost, and it can really make a difference. So again, spool a little puddle out on your quilt and check it out. Gretchen, I'm quilting a quilt with navy blue and gold colors, and I'm stumped. Any suggestions? I mean, right off the bat, I'm going to say try bridging that gap. Try paler golds or lighter grayer, maybe blues. But also absolutely experiment with a few of the things we've talked about, different shades of gray, for example, and see how that plays out for you. See if maybe, like I don't know what your quilt style is like, but maybe a variegated gold that's got shades of gold would add an almost embroidered dimension to your quilt. Maybe you'd like that look and maybe you wouldn't. That's entirely up to you, but experiment, play around with threads. CM is saying a blue gold variegated, and that might work well. On a 2-color quilt, you might love the effect of a blue and gold variegated. Samantha, what are your thoughts on metallic thread? Oh, so far, Samantha, I have not used metallic to quilt entire quilt tops. Again, I think the thread has a bit different feel. It's just a bit crisper and to me not cuddly, not a thing that I love in a couch quilt. I've only used metallics when I'm embellishing or doing something extra or like a pillow or something pretty like that. They quilt absolutely fine. I sometimes have to lower my top tension just a touch to let them feed through, but I've not used them across an entire quilt. Although I think they would look fine. I think in some ways metallics can be a neutral. You know, a sparkly gold or a sparkly silver could be a neutral and fit across many colors just in terms of color, but I don't love the feel of a metallic thread. My opinion, as always. Melanie, shades of a similar color. I'm not sure who she was tuning into, but yes. Gaynor, thread is like, I gotta put this one up. Thread is like a box of chocolates. You never know which one to choose. And I say pick all of them. Melanie, great tips. CM, the quilt will sometimes tell you what thread to use, the quilt whisperer. Certainly, spooling little puddles out onto the quilt will help to clarify because you'll just get a good sense of what it looks like and if you like it or not. Teresa, I've used 100-weight thread. Good for you. I've tried 100-weight thread, Teresa, particularly with black-white quilts, the very highest contrast ones. I find I have trouble with breakage. 100 weight is so very fine and not terribly strong for that reason. And I feel like perhaps not very durable as well. So for me personally, 80 is my limit for actually quilting an entire quilt top. 100 weight is certainly good though if you're doing some custom quilting in like an area, for example, that has a dense fill, bubbles, or little tiny feathers or something like that. 100 weight is a perfect use right there because you get less of the heavy thread buildup look. And now we're going down rabbit trails. Karen Thompson, still learning long arm and the backing colors influence what I pick. Yes. And sometimes that is certainly the case. You know, if on the front of the quilt, a green or a gold would look great, but your backing is gold, that might just lean you right toward the gold, just like that. Laura Lee, I've found bottom line almost disappears on the backing. And bottom line is a particular brand. Is it by... I'm not sure who makes it. I'm sorry, Laura Lee, you might want to chime that in the comments. But I believe it's a line of pre-wound bobbins and possibly also a line of thread, but intended for bobbins. Samantha, got your question. Good. Cindy Lou, where do you get those huge spools of isocord thread? They're fairly readily available. Some stores stock them and some only stock the 1,000. They might bring in the 5,000 if you ask them. But I'll tell you where I got mine. Early on, I found a seller on eBay that offered them and carried all the colors and offered free shipping at a very reasonable price per spool. And that's where I ordered them for a long time. Now I did get a wholesale account with Amon USA who manufactures it. And so I order directly from the company and that's where I get mine. But eBay was a good choice. I know you don't hear about eBay so much anymore, but it's not that long since I looked at isocord thread on there, and there are still sellers that offer it. Sally, what about embroidery thread? So embroidery thread that comes in a skein like DMC floss, definitely not. That does not have the strength you need for machine quilting. However, machine embroidery, that's what isocord and even Wonderfill are very frequently used for. The 100% poly, slightly glossy thread are used in embroidery machines, so same thread, and you can use them same machines, or on both machines. Edna, Superior monofilament works if you really have to use it. Good to know, so there's a brand recommendation for you. Quilts do have personalities, Edna is adding. I agree, and your thread choice can certainly influence the playful versus the conservative versus the decorative feel of the quilt. Lori, have you shared the pattern of the quilt behind you today? I have not, Lori, because I don't have a pattern. This was a vintage quilt top that was given to me. It is hexes and diamonds. That's all that's in it, but it is totally hand-pieced. And hello again from Canary Islands. I love to use a mocha color thread. So I think of mocha as a deep, deep, rich tan, lighter than a brown, deeper than a tan. Is that kind of what you're thinking of? And I can see, you know, it depends too on what your taste even is in fabrics. If you're doing your own quilts, you know, do you have light 30s florals or do you have deep country sort of colors, right? Those will all influence your thread tendencies as well. Okay, you guys, there's lots more coming in, but I think we're going to have to call a halt here pretty soon. I'll try and get one more. Barbara, could you explain why the bobbin tension changes when working on an edge-to-edge on the Q24? Do you know, I really can't, Barbara. I do know one tip that I'll give you, and I got this straight from one of the service gentlemen at Bernina at their creative center. One tip he gave me was to actually wind the bobbin slower than the default that the machine came with. So I wind mine at 60% of the max speed, and I find I have pretty good results. I've certainly heard other people say, you know, at the beginning of the bobbin, I get X tension, and then as I go down into the lower half of the bobbin, my tension changes. I've not found that to be true. I've found that my stitches come out pretty consistent. So give that a try, just slowing down that bobbin winding speed, and see if that gives you a better overall tension on your bobbin. Okay, thanks you guys so much for joining in. Remember, I am here every day for the month of April, talking about all things machine quilting, and next Saturday I'll be having a workshop. So I'll be sending out an email later this week with an invitation to that. So be watching for that. Get on my newsletter if you're not already. You can do that very easily at my website, StitchedBySusan.com. Also, my husband desperately wants me to mention today, so I will. We're hosting a machine quilting cruise next January. If you want any information on that, there's a link from my regular website, and also the cruise has its own website, SB Experiences. And we lost our camera again, so I'll get back on this one. Oh my goodness, it's got a flicker today. I don't know what to say. Anyway, if you want any information about the cruise, I will be there. So it's an opportunity to come and quilt at a long arm alongside me. I'll be giving instructions on some of my style of quilting, plus Beth Ann Nemesh and Sam Alberts are joining as 2 guest teachers, and they're both fabulous. And we 3 have quite different styles of quilting, but we're really working together to create this cohesive group of classes that I think are just going to be awesome. So that's happening in January of next year. Again, from my website, you can grab any information for that, or sbexperiences.com will also give you information. So hope to see some of you there. And until tomorrow, have a great day quilting or whatever it is that you're doing today. And I'm going to get on to loading the next quilt. Let's talk to you again tomorrow.